In this video, I'm going to be talking with Roy Moore, Salesforce architect and user group leader, about some of the common questions people have when they start their Salesforce certification journey. I hope you find it useful.
One of the common questions that we get from people new to Salesforce and starting their Salesforce journey is, which Salesforce certification should I do first? And so I'm here with Roy Moore, and we're going to talk about this question. So Roy, what is your answer? What do you recommend to people when they ask you which certification they should start with?
Well, first off, that's a great question. It's maybe one of the most important questions you ask about Salesforce is where you start. What is your foundation going to be? Now, the answer is going to depend a little bit, but for the vast majority, vast majority of people, I think they should start with the admin certification. And the reason for that is the Salesforce admin certification, even though it's not necessarily a prerequisite for other certs, it kind of is. It's expected that you have this basic administrative knowledge of Salesforce. So think of the certification, the admin certification, as the high school diploma of Salesforce. It's the bare minimum. It's the basic, and everything else will build off of that. A couple of exceptions that might consider looking at a different certification is those who are maybe developers who have a very strong developer bent. They could start with the platform app builder certification, which is very similar to the admin certification. If I had to break out the differences between them, I would say the admin certification focuses more on the proper care and feeding of your Salesforce org as administrator. And the app builder is more of a how to enhance it declaratively. So a lot of developers, they want to go straight into more developer stuff. So they might want to go to the app builder, but most should go to admin. The other exception are those who are only in one of Salesforce's more, what's a good term for it? Tertiary products. Like if you're only in Marketing Cloud, then admin, and you're never in Salesforce proper, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, those types of things. If you're only in Marketing Cloud, then look at the Marketing Cloud certifications. Probably the email marketing certification is where you want to start. But yeah, most people should start with the admin certification.
And just to add on to that, it can be very tempting to think that admin isn't really required, as Roy mentioned, if you're more on the development side. But admin does give you all of that foundation knowledge that really is required. It's a building block, and there are so many fundamental topics within admin. For example, sharing and security, and all about users and data management. And it really is a step that you should go through, and I think it's also expected that you have a really good declarative knowledge.
You're absolutely right. And I'm glad you said that, Martin, because on the Developer One certification, the Platform Dev One, it says that they have a strong handle on the declarative functionality of Salesforce. And there are several questions on the developer certification exam that the right answer is the one that requires the least amount of configuration. So it might be a declarative answer. So if all you know is code, then you're missing out on some knowledge that you need for the developer certification.
So there's also a resource on the Salesforce website that lists the different roles and the certs.
Yes, this is from Trailhead, Salesforce's learning platform. And if you go to Trailhead, you can go to a section where you choose your role. And there's actually been a new one added since this one. There are 5 showing here. There's a 6th one, I believe, about user design, user experience design. But from here, you can kind of look at different stories that see which one fits your bend, which that fits what you're leaning towards and how you're wired. So that is one way that you might approach looking at certifications.
Right, and so you can click on these different roles, and Salesforce will give you some suggestions on the certifications that would be appropriate for those roles. The other way to look at this is from a more generic job role sort of point of view. And here we've got 5 different common Salesforce roles listed. And thinking about, where do you want to actually go? What are you most interested in? Are you interested in on the admin side? Are you interested in a more technical career as a developer, or a consultant business analyst, or an architect? And that's going to lead you into very broadly 2 different paths that you could follow. So there's a functional
Mhm.
career path and there's a technical career path. So on the functional career path, that would align more with an admin or a consultant role. Um, Architects, I think they sort of overlap between functional and technical. But if you're more aligned with a functional career path, then this is a suggestion of a path that you could follow. So obviously starting with admin, advanced admin, that is good to know. There are a lot of advanced topics in that. And sometimes that just depends on the environment that you're in, whether you're actually using some of the things that are covered in advanced admin, like territory management, forecasting, more advanced reporting. And then you can see App Builder is in there. And even if you're on a functional career path, it's still important to know what can be done declaratively, what's actually possible. And then the next box is, it's just listed as consultant. Salesforce has a number of different consultant certs. So obviously there's the sales consultant, service consultant, field service consultant, and it goes on. And then there are specialty certs. And then you may wish to go down to the end of the path, which is getting into the architect level certs. So that's on the functional side. And on the technical side, admin is listed as the foundation, and then App Builder, because as we just discussed, that's really about understanding how you can declaratively build applications. And then you get into the more technical ones, which you might want to jump in straight away, but you need to restrain yourself. And then you'd get into the platform developer 1 and the JavaScript developer 1 level, before then getting on to either getting into more specialty certs. So if you're in an environment that, for example, is using field service or using marketing cloud or using something that's a little bit more, I guess, out of the normal range of clouds, that's where you'd look at maybe obtaining one of those. Platform Developer 2 is a more advanced one from Platform Developer 1. It's probably becoming a little bit less popular because it's not aligned to becoming an architect. And then a lot of technical people on that path, they then go into the system and application architect level certs.
Going back to the whole school analogy, if the admin is the high school diploma, I'd say the undeclared version of a certification pass would probably go from admin to app builder to advanced admin to sales cloud to service cloud. That would be the path I'd probably suggest for someone who's not sure. They know they want to do Salesforce. They know they like what they've seen so far, but they're not sure if they're going to become a consultant or a developer, but they're just getting started. If they start with those 5, they are starting with the staples of Salesforce. This is the bread and butter that Salesforce has had for a very, very long time. And then after those 5, if you still haven't got your your major settled, then you might, I don't know, then you might just be a generalist, a consultant. But at that point, you probably have a good idea, like, wow, I really want to go deeper on development, or I really want to go deeper on marketing, or I really want to go deeper, or my job requires me to go deeper on these things. And then you can look into those certifications. But yeah, admin, app builder, advanced admin, sales, and service would not be a bad path for someone who's not sure what's next.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Obviously, Salesforce started as a CRM, and so Sales Cloud is the foundation on the functional side for everything. So just understanding all about how accounts and contacts and opportunities and leads and all those foundational objects, how that actually, how that works is really important, because everything else has kind of been built on top of that. So that's a really good point of just including, considering doing sales and service as in that sort of foundation level.
Yeah, you might even think of those as general education requirements.
Our suggestion is everyone should start here. Roy has also mentioned that, well, you could start at App Builder, but we really recommend you start with admin.
And this was something we called out a minute ago, just saying that even if you don't want to do those, you're a developer who's been doing code for a long time, well, take note of this key line from the Trailhead description of the Platform Dev 1 certification. Platform Dev 1, a Salesforce developer knows when to use declarative versus programmatic methods. How do you know that if you don't know the declarative side of Salesforce?
And I think it's becoming even more important, because in every single release, Salesforce is expanding the capabilities of the declarative tools. And if you're jumping straight into PD1, you're missing out on all of that. One particular example is Flow. Every release, Flow becomes more and more powerful, and that doesn't require coding ability. And so you're missing out on all of that if you jump straight into PD1.
Yeah, and just because you know Java, sure, that means you can read Apex and you can maybe even figure out how to write it with the nuances that are different. But that doesn't mean you know how to set up a validation rule or or a permission set. I mean, there's all these things that you can do declaratively that coding does not cover. So we've really beat this horse to death, I think. But
It's a really important one,
get to
though,
know the declarative
because
side of Salesforce. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's a really important one because one of the things that you really want to avoid is to come up with a solution that's programmatic when it didn't need to be.